and welcome in to Cullman today. Debbie Wood along with Patrick Ray representing Doyle Real Estate. We're going to talk everything about real estate, the way 2014 ended. Good morning to you. Always good to see you.
Good
Even
morning.
though you aggravate the stew out of me, Patrick loves to aggravate you. If he loves you, he aggravates you,
That's
right?
exactly right. If I didn't, I wouldn't like you.
You wouldn't pick at us all the time. But 2014 for me as a real estate agent with Doyle was a fairly good year. I didn't probably do as much as I did the year before, but I certainly saw an increase. Did you notice
Yeah, I
anything?
think there was a trend that we did see more people purchasing homes throughout the year. You know, we talked a little bit about, you and I did before we started this, we talked a little bit about what is trending in Cullman.
Right.
We've seen a growth in the city, you know, of new houses being built, and we have seen also a smaller growth in the county of newer homes being built, spec homes,
Right.
and people purchasing those homes. At one point, what the trend was and what was leading up to that was the school system, the city school system, and folks wanting to be in the city school system,
Right.
and when they were trying to keep the numbers down. You know, this year they opened up to a 6A class, so
Okay.
the numbers expanded on who they could take into out of district.
Okay. So does that increase quite a bit? I mean,
The numbers increased.
Yes.
They did increase quite a bit. I don't remember the numbers
Okay.
exactly off the top of my head, but I know they
Okay.
did allow a lot of the out-of-district kids to join into the city. As a matter of fact, my son got in the truck yesterday and said that one of his friends from a baseball team had started at East yesterday.
Okay.
So they're still accepting out-of-districts
students,
as
okay.
the year goes on, which
Okay.
before they were really
Limited.
holding those numbers, limiting
Yeah.
those numbers of who they would allow.
absolutely.
So how that's going to trend as we go into 2015, not really sure. I
Right.
still think we're going to see a growth in the city.
Right.
The biggest problem, and it's not a problem, but the biggest hurdle in the city is available lots for people to build on.
Oh, I know.
Plenty of existing houses, but
They're gone, aren't they? There's not
a
a lot of
lot
lots
of
left.
lots are gone. Yeah,
I mean, we just don't see that much, do we?
we don't.
I mean, there's not a lot of available land left. Let's talk just a second before we get into that too deep, and there are certain lots more that we're going to talk about in that area. But interest rates, we saw them holding pretty much all of 2014 around
we did.
4.5.
4.25.
4.25?
Really 4.25
Okay.
on a 30-year. I don't really think we're going to see that change anytime soon.
Do you not?
I don't.
Do we ever know? I mean, could something happen and they go sky high? I mean, it certainly could. But
Absolutely. You know, there's a lot of different factors that are involved. Who's in office, your representatives are in office, what the market's doing, the stock market, different things can play a factor
Right.
into what interest rates are doing. What they've tried to do is keep the interest rates down to motivate people to buy homes.
Okay.
Because, you know, purchasing a home is one of the biggest boosts for our economy.
Sure.
So if people are not purchasing homes, then the economy tends to drag. And they've tried to hold interest rates, you know, pretty much at that number, 4.25 on a 30, and then it's going to drop as you go to a 15 and a 10.
Okay.
There are some loans where you can buy down, and there are still some 100% finance loans that are out there.
Okay.
Now-
And when you say that, let's stop for just 1 second. When you said 100%, are we talking about what are some of those programs
Well, you've got,
where you don't have to pay anything down? But it's based on your income, right?
it is based on your income.
Okay.
You've got USDA. You know,
USDA,
USDA
yes.
is probably the main one where you can do 100% financing. And what we do in that situation is we negotiate out the price of the property,
Right.
the price of the house, of the home. And then typically what we do is roll in the closing cost into that purchase price.
Okay.
So it looks like the seller's paying the cost, but it's no money out of the buyer's pocket.
Gotcha.
And they get the 100% financing that way.
Okay.
If you go conventional, FHA, VA, any of the other loans, you're going to be looking at probably 3 to 3.5% down on the loan amount. And that's going to depend on your credit rating also. It
Well, that's
could go
true.
up if you have, you know, worse credit than the typical homeowner. So
Okay.
there's a
Now,
lot of factors.
USDA, I always, I think it's such a wonderful program for people if you qualify. And you can make up to how much? What are the guidelines
Combined,
on
I believe, is
75, isn't
I
it?
believe it's 78. I believe
78
it's combined. I
combined?
believe.
Okay.
You know, that's something you'd want to check with your lender and make sure. But if I'm going off the top of my head, and I believe it's around that number.
Wow.
Oh,
So
yeah.
see,
Oh, yeah.
you can make good money and still be able to
Absolutely.
benefit, and those interest rates are great too. And sometimes, you know, the amount of paperwork is pretty much the same. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer on a USDA loan, but not that bad.
And there are more inspections that might be involved when
Right.
you do USDA. You know, typically they're going to require a septic tank inspection because, but depending on the age of the house, but typically they're going to require a septic tank inspection where your other loans may not.
Okay.
A lot of times they may require a survey.
Okay.
They are going to require a wood infestation report, which you're going to do on your other loans
Sure.
typically anyways.
Yeah, absolutely.
The biggest aspect of the USDA as a home buyer that you need to know is that going into it on an FHA or a VA or a conventional loan, you're looking at closing probably 30 days once you have a contract. And we've talked about in some of our meetings the difference between a contract and an offer. Once both parties have signed that offer, it becomes a binding contract. And you've got contingencies to be met. And you've got usually 10 days to get those out of the way, and then we move forward to proceed with closing, title work, and the different aspects of that. With a USDA, you're looking 45 to 60 days,
Okay.
and it depends on the funding that the government has released and what's out there as to how quick it's going to close.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
it could, it's not typical, but it could be even a little longer than 60 days.
Okay.
So as a buyer, that's something that you need to know and need to realize going into it, so you're not expecting a 30-day close and it drags out and drags out. So
Absolutely.
those are some of the differences.
Well, USDA, this is probably a strange question, but can you do refis with USDA? Do they do those?
They
I don't
don't-
know.
I don't think they
I don't think they do
typically
that
do
either, do
refis.
they? It's basically new home purchase, not new home, but home purchase.
purchase.
So interest rates are still great. That we
They
ended
are.
the year and started 2015 out with great interest rates. But what we're seeing, and I've got to ask this before we take a quick break and come back and we get into it a little bit deeper. Seeing some growth in new building in other parts of our state, like down around the beach. I understand that Gulf Shores is experiencing some growth, new building, and that's been sort of stagnant over the last several years. Does that affect us? Will that help us?
You know, growth is typically, and the real estate market is a very unusual animal. You know, you might have a county, 2 counties over that they're experiencing not much growth at all, and then you look at like Cullman right now.
Right.
We are growing in the commercial side of real estate tremendously. Growth like I have never seen before. I've been in this business 13 years. You look at the shopping centers that are coming up. You look at the different retailers that we have coming in, and
Right.
the growth on all ends of the town. You've got north, south, and the middle end of town where there's just tremendous growth.
Sure.
Typically, that's my word for the day, typically. Typically, with commercial growth, residential growth follows. And if you think about it this way, you're providing more jobs for the community, so you're more than likely going to bring more people into the area to fill those jobs.
Okay.
So typically with commercial growth, you're going to have residential growth. So that's one thing to look at trending as we go through this next year in Cullman.
Okay.
As for the beach, how is that going to affect us in Cullman?
Right.
It's probably not going to affect us a whole lot.
It's not going to trickle up.
No, you know, it could not. You just
Okay.
don't know. Now, one
Okay.
thing to keep in mind is those are vacation homes. Most often they're vacation homes.
Right.
The one trend we did see in the past is our Smith Lake area.
Yes.
And a lot of people are looking for vacation homes on the lake and maybe not so much the Gulf.
Right.
And I'm going to tell you, the lake is still growing.
Yes.
Smith Lake is still booming, still a lot of growth.
Absolutely.
A lot of activity on the lake, and that is a positive for our area.
It is, isn't it?
Because same way, it brings in outside people, even if it's a vacation home, well, they're going to come
They're
in
gonna
and
spend their
shop
money with
in the
us,
community, so it's a plus. So it's a win-win.
And they might end up wanting to live here, permanently. So let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about, I've got a couple things I want to throw in there about the lake, and then also the commercial end of it and how that's probably going to affect, hopefully, the sales in our community.
Sure.
So we'll be back with more of Cullman Today right after this.